Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto Vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
Feathers. Naruto frowned angrily as he walked away from the edge of the Okage monument. A couple of paint cans in his hands, each holding two brushes, rubbing his right forearm against his stomach. As he stepped away from the edge. For the past few days, his arms, hands and fingers had been burning intermittently, as if they had lit invisible miniature fires. And let them burn without flame. Waves of stabbing pain had also attacked the same areas of his body, but they were not as frequent as the burning sensation. Have I brushed against some poison ivy? Poison ivy was common in the forests surrounding the village. And it was not uncommon for one or two scattered plants to grow inside the village. The sound of stampeding footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and instinctively, the blonde turned his head towards the approaching sound. There, less than 9 meters away, jumping up the path that led from the base of the monument to the top. And sitting at the observation post, there were several Chunin, all with red faces, either from the fatigue of climbing, running down the 20 flights of stairs, or because of the anger they felt when they saw his work. "Oh shit!" he exclaimed as 2 of the 6 visible Chunin headed straight towards him. Swinging his body, his paint buckets and his brushes, the blonde boy turned around and ran towards the observation post. "Grab him!" one of the Chunin shouted as she joined her 2 male counterparts. To chase after the blonde-haired, orange-clad academy student brandishing a bucket of paint. Running at full speed, Naruto arrived at the observation station, slipped around the left corner of the building, and started looking for a place to hide or go under to hide from the Chun. In that I was following him. Looking around, the blonde preteen found nothing. Hearing the Chunin advancing towards his position, Naruto's heart raced. With the adrenaline pumping, the blonde looked towards the edge of the monument and walked quickly towards it. Looking over the edge, he swallowed. About 3.5 meters away, there was the crown of the Nidaime, and with it, a small hiding place created by the stone that formed 3 of its hairs. The only problem was that if I slipped, I would fall more than 60 meters and die. I didn't want to die. "There he is!" La Chunin shouted as she and 2 others surrounded the observation station. "Wow!" he immediately shouted, raising a hand when he saw where the boy was and how close he was to the edge of the mountain. Naruto looked at her strangely, wondering why he had prevented his companions from advancing towards him. The other 3 remaining Chunin rounded the opposite edge of the building and also stopped, afraid of what the blonde might do. "Stay away from the edge, Uzumaki!" the woman screamed with a tone of fear in her voice. "What the hell?" the blonde orphan asked himself as he looked at the woman. Confused. "What? Do you think I'm going to jump?" He looked at the Migaime's head again and swallowed. Right, I was thinking about jumping, ouch. I'm an asshole." A twinge of pain ran through his right arm, making him shudder and stagger slightly backwards. "Get back." His right heel teetered on the edge, terrifying both Naruto and all the Chunin present. Luckily for him, Naruto leaned forward and brandished the 2 paint cans in front of him, propelling him with his weight forward, pulling him away from the edge of the mountain. A series of sighs of relief filled the air. It was close, Naruto said to himself, staring at his right arm for a split second before he remembered where he was. What he had done less than 10 minutes ago and who had surrounded him. He looked at the 6 Chunin and found them with their hands over their hearts and their heads bowed. A smile was drawn on his face. "Here." He brandished one of the paint cans, brushes and all, towards Chunin's group on his right, covering the woman and the 2 men with purple paint. Taking advantage of the moment of surprise and confusion he had just created, the blonde attacked them, easily getting ahead. As he ran towards the stairs that descended to the village. "Grr!" the woman growled loudly, her arms at her sides and her fists clenched. "Let's get him!" he roared as she and the 5 men moved to keep chasing the blonde. Somewhere in the village, Naruto laughed out loud as he dodged 2 of the 5 Chunin, who had found him walking in broad daylight, with the can of paint still in his hand, in front of the ramen and Chiraku bar. They had been chasing him for almost 10 minutes, and although the twinges of pain and the searing sensation, almost of fire, prevented him from running at full speed, Naruto was still able to dodge, stop, and evade his attacks. "They can't catch me," he sneered as he turned a corner, leaving the village and entering a residential street. The two Chunin growled loudly, insulted him, and sped up. With a mocking smile, Naruto saw the opportunity to throw them off. A large piece of wooden fence was less than 15 meters away. Remembering that he was wearing his cape, Naruto smiled as he thought of a plan to get rid of the two Chunin. A couple hundred feet behind the two Chunin, and Mari frowned splattered with paint as she ran after two of her fellow Chunin, who were slowly approaching their blonde and orange-clad target. To her left, a person landed next to her. He recognized it. "Iruka," he snapped. The brown man looked at her briefly, frowning. "What are you doing?" "Hunting a runaway clown, you," he replied. Imari's frown deepened. "Looking for that same clown," she said. The chestnut nodded. "Do you mind if I ask him to wash my clothes before you take him to the academy?" "Unfortunately, I need to get back as soon as possible," he said. Imari's frown deepened even more. "However, after he finishes his chores and cleans up the Okage monument, I'll be sure to take him to your apartment." The woman nodded, a fierce smile quickly forming. "So, how many of you are chasing him?" "Just the three of you." "No, there were three more." He fell silent, noticing that his two companions were turning the corner, going around the wooden fence. They must have lost him. Iruka shook his head in disagreement. "Naruto may not be the smartest kid in the world, and he is definitely not the best student in the village, but he is fast, cunning, and has a quick mind. He's not someone you want to chase around the village, not with his knowledge of the best hiding places. In fact, he lost them, not the other way around." And Mary felt slowly. Suddenly, less than 15 meters from the corner of the wooden fence, the academy instructor pointed out a small orange spot that was visible through a small hole in the fence. "It's him." "How do you know that?" the Kunoichi asked her shinobi counterpart. Iruka snorted slightly. "No one else in the village wears orange clothes as bright and horrible as it is monkey that Naruto wears." He was silent for a second, squinting slightly. "That. And I have a sixth sense with that guy," and Mari blinked confused, but let the subject pass. Naruto laughed out loud as the two Chunin ran past his hideout, which was right behind a small tarpaulin painted to mimic the fence behind it. Rubbing his head and laughing victoriously, the blonde smiled as he walked away from the fence. "Idiots!" he screamed. "They can't catch the great Uzumaki Naruto that easily." He closed his eyes, and a big smile appeared on his face. The sudden darkening of the area around him, and the coldness that brushed his body, as the shadows quickly invaded him. They quickly did not go unnoticed. "Oh shit! Naruto?" There were two, one very familiar, and one slightly familiar. He opened his blue eyes, and saw the Chunin woman whom he had sprayed the purple paint on earlier, standing over him like a hawk. On his left was a very familiar and very angry Academy sensei. He laughed shyly, suddenly feeling very small. "Hi, Iruka sensei." A strong hand grabbed him by the back of his white t-shirt and lifted him off the ground. "What?" he screamed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The angry man growled at the blonde, who was hanging by his hand, helpless, like a fish foolish, and hungry enough to bite a baited hook, and then too weak to fight the fisherman and the retractable reel. Yui started the blonde, trying to think of something to say. A quick shake silenced him. "First, let's go to the academy, Naruto," the angry man said slowly. "Then clean the monument. And then, you're going to take all the paint off Emerison's clothes, do you understand me?" The man's narrowed eyes made it hard for the blonde to disagree. Nodding, the man also felt her sharply, in a way that screamed well. With his arms and fingers on fire, and his stomach churning from the pain coursing through his body, Naruto kept rubbing the paint off Imari's clothes. On the side, drinking a cup of tea, were Iruka and Mari chatting animatedly. Sure. Laugh at each other's jokes while I'm here, standing next to a tub, washing your damn clothes by hand. He took a quick look at the two Chunin. Her blue eyes narrowed dangerously. It's not that I feel terrible or anything. Maybe if he had expressed how he felt, no. He shook his head and started rubbing faster and harder, ignoring the pain as best he could. Iruka Baka will send me to the infirmary or something. I'll take care of this and then I'll go home. He doesn't have to find out. Yes. Are you sure you don't want ramen, Naruto? Iruka asked his blonde student, wondering if he would be okay. The blonde nodded. Me, I'm too tired to eat ramen today, Iruka-sensei, the blonde replied, dismissing the man's unspoken concern with a gesture. My arms hurt, my hands hurt, I just want to sleep. Iruka's worried frown slowly disappeared, and a small smile replaced it. He slapped the blonde man on the back, causing waves of sharp pain, like punctures, that traveled up and down his back. Not knowing how his student was feeling at that moment. I guess this will serve as a lesson for you, huh? He asked the blonde, who frowned. Don't paint the monument, or your fellow Konoha ninjas, if you don't want to go to jail. The blonde man grumbled under his breath. Iruka's smile widened. Well, then I'll let you go home. After all, you'll need to rest if you want to pass the exam tomorrow. The next morning. It took all her strength not to scream in pain as she sat down in her assigned seat in the academy classroom. The pain, burning and tingling had returned, and it was worse than ever. All because Iruka Baka made me scrub the stupid monument. A slight blush came over the boy's face. As he mentally reviewed part of what happened the night before, how he had cleaned Emerison's bra, where the painting. Purple had stained his shirt and soaked his underwear. He shook his head violently, trying to push the memory away, but wished he hadn't as he felt new waves of pain. Closing his eyes tightly, the blonde rested his head gently on the surface of his desk, hoping somehow that the cold desk could cure his pain. He didn't do it. I hope this goes away before it's my turn to take the exam. The last thing I need is for this stupid pain to make me stop. Exam. Minjinin. Do you understand, Naruto? Iruka asked while staring at the blonde, frowning at the sight of his most annoying, interesting and above all confused student. Restless in a way that made him think that the boy was in pain. But he was desperately trying to hide it from everyone. It wasn't working, he noticed as he looked at Mizuki, who was also looking at him strangely. Are you okay, Naruto? He expressed his thought. The question made the boy notice his brown eyes. I'm fine. It was the blonde's dry response. Frowning, but ignoring his tone, the Chunin motioned for him to continue. He nodded, rubbed his stomach with his arms almost desperately for a couple of seconds. Then, he got into position and began to invoke his chakra. The floor began to shake, and the paintings on the walls too, while a shade of blue, surrounded the blonde's body. Spider-like cracks appeared in the paint decorating the walls as the blonde concentrated. Both Chunin looked at the boy in disbelief. So much chakra. He's overdoing it, Iruka thought. The chestnut Chunin had never seen an academy student invoke chakra so much that it became visible, shook the floor, and the paintings on the wall, and caused the paint to crack like ice covering a puddle in a cold winter day. Bunsen no Jutsu. Later that afternoon, Mizuki saw the blonde boy walking with difficulty through the village, probably heading to his apartment. Lo Kaviz. I didn't know if he was depressed because he had failed the exam for the third time in a row, or if it was because I was still in pain, as before during the exam. Not that it matters if it hurts. The silver-haired man thought. He just has to bite the worm. Hey! He screamed. The boy seemed to ignore him as he walked through the streets. Frowning, the white-haired man wondered if the boy hadn't heard him. He tried again, this time harder. Hey! Naruto! The boy suddenly raised his head and looked for him. He ran to the boy and put a hand on his right shoulder. The touch startled him a little, but Mizuki ignored it. Hey Mizuki-sensei, the boy greeted him, offering him a smile that the Chunin immediately identified as fake. "What's the matter?" "Don't blame Iruka, Naruto-kun," he began. "He may be a little harsh and maybe a little blunt, but he only has your best intentions." The blonde man frowned. "It's that damn Bunsen," the blonde complained, not caring in the least about the people surrounding them as they walked down the street. "No matter how hard I try, no matter how much I practice, I can't." Mizuki gave the boy a compassionate pat or two on the right shoulder. "I'm sure you'll understand very soon, Naruto-kun," he stated. "I wanted to graduate today, Mizuki-sensei," exclaimed the boy loudly. "I wanted to become a genin and participate in missions. Crush bandits, rescue princesses in distress." The boy's arms flew into the sky, almost hitting Mizuki in the face with his right fist. Luckily, the Chunin had the sense to move his face to the right to avoid being hit by the boy's fist. "And you know, Naruto-Kyumi," Mizuki began, taking a look around as she lowered the sarral and the hook in front of the preteen. "And there's another way and another way and another way." "What?" Mizuki happily smiled at the blonde. "To become a genin, of course." "And tell me." Several hours later, Naruto looked dreamily at the scroll he had left on the forest floor, spread out in front of him. For the last hour or so he had been dangerously close to falling asleep, but he had stayed awake only by sheer force of will. That, although exhausting, turned out to be a good thing. The conditions of the recovery exam were that he had to steal the forbidden scroll from the office of the Okage, which he had already done, despite the pain that continued to plague his body. The other conditions were that he had to be near the training hut, south of the village, which was used by the students of the academy from time to time, and that he had to learn at least one jutsu. The scroll was filled with jutsus, but except for two, Naruto could not understand them in any way. Many revolved around sacrifice, super speed, and the manipulation of time. It made him feel even stupider than he thought he was. The only two he could understand were a genjutsu, which he discarded immediately. Remembering a small part of Sakura's explanation of the previous day about the genjutsu, something about the need for good chakra control, and that if not, you could do a single bunsen, then genjutsu was impossible. That remark was more or less directed at him, and if it weren't for the withering look he had given her as he spoke, she might have mistaken it for useful advice. The other jutsu on the scroll was a type of bunsen, and despite fearing that he wouldn't be able to do it, he was the only jutsu that had that scroll that he could understand correctly. So, sitting on the floor, looking at the scroll or the inside of his eyelids for seconds, for almost 2 hours. The blonde studied non-stop, going over all the notes written on the scroll, there weren't many of them, and going over the signs of the technique. He had tried jutsu from time to time, but the clones had turned out just as bad, or even worse, than the original bunsen technique that was taught at the academy. However, he noticed that some of his last attempts were getting better and better, albeit slowly. As he forced his burning hands and fingers through the seals once more, ignoring the pain as best he could, the blonde-haired preteen failed to notice the brown-haired man who had landed on the branch of a tree several meters to your left. "Ah, one more shot," Naruto told himself as he struggled to master the jutsu. Invoking his chakra, which looked like boiling water flowing through his veins instead of blood, the blonde inhaled deeply. As the faint moonlight that had bathed him all night turned a dark, almost dangerous black, he tried to manipulate his seals and mispronounced the words of the jutsu while turning his head to see what had come up to him while training. The resulting explosion in life, the scroll, himself and the shadow that accompanied it, several meters from the epicenter of the chakra explosion. His cry of pain was repeated by an older, deeper, more irritated one to his left. Looking up from his resting place, he noticed the familiar figure of his academy sensei, Iruka, lying on the floor, moaning and trying on parts of his body. The neck, hands, arms, legs, and feet. "Iruka-sensei," Naruto asked in a low, husky voice. "What?" The academy instructor shot him down with a look so fierce that it silenced the blonde almost instantly. Naruto hit the man hard. A dangerous tone persisted in his voice. What are you doing stealing in the village? His mismatched eyes narrowed in confusion. Why the hell would you steal from the Okage? The man continued. I know you're angry about not passing the exam, but this is not the way to become a genin. This is one of the fastest ways to become a nukenin. The boy's eyes widened as he felt the surprise. Baby, not even the Academy sensei. Not even the blonde had time to say anything more as several kunai fell from the surrounding trees, cutting the air towards them. Instinctively, the older of the two, who was in the small clearing near the hut, pulled out his own crib and jumped in front of the blonde. He blocked several of the approaching kunai, saving him, but leaving him vulnerable to several of the flying leaves that severed his back, legs, and left shoulder. Boom. I hope I caught you off guard, Iruka. I guess they didn't give you the title of Chunin out of pity. After all, an all too familiar voice was heard from one of the surrounding trees. Both the injured Chunin and the preteen turned their gaze towards a tall oak tree and found Mizuki, with white hair, smiling at them. One of the two large shurikens was hanging from his right hand, crouched over the large branch on which he had perched. A creaking sound filled the small clearing, and two other figures appeared, locking the wounded Chun and Naruto in the small clearing. They were both tall and skinny, and appeared to be extremely dirty. The rusty ones of besides Iwa faintly reflected part of the moon's rays as they slowly walked towards him. Mizuki, Iruka exclaimed, shocked and confused, as he looked at the two Iwanin and then at his fellow Academy member. The man in question smiled broadly, with a cold gaze, and yet at the same time, filled with a burning, almost insane hatred. Why is that? Actually, 2 reasons. Irakaken, the white-haired man began, waving his right hand, and a large shuriken at the same time, indicating the two Iwanin to approach them in the clearing. Fame and money. 2 things that this village stole from me 2 years ago when I was forced to be arrested. He went down to the forest floor and approached the brown-haired man, stopping a step away from the Chunin. Do you remember my last mission, Iruka? The white-haired Chunin asked. The Academy sensei nodded slowly, ignoring the pain the small weapons had caused him. How did my colleagues disappear and then turn up dead? The brown-haired man nodded again. Mizuki walked up to him and brought her mouth several inches away from his left ear. They didn't disappear, Iruka-kun, they were killed, Iruka exclaimed with a gasp as the shuriken in his hand. Mizuki's right was climbing up the chestnut tree's left leg. The farthest point went through the clothes, the armor, and finally the skin, like a hot knife cutting butter. That's right, Irakaken, I did it. He pushed the shuriken away from loyal Academy sensei's leg and outlined a malicious smile. History, as you no doubt know, has a way of repeating itself. The gray-haired man turned away from Iruka and focused his attention on the battered scroll on the floor and, finally, on the blonde who had provided it to him. You've done well, Naruto-kun, he admitted. Even with all my skills, I wouldn't have had the stealth or the luck to steal something of as much value and importance to the village of Lost Noses del Okage as you. He snapped his fingers. And the two Iwanin pounced on the blonde, one holding him by one arm and the other by the other. Together, they pulled him away from Iruka and held him like a training dummy. Writhing like a fish out of water, the blonde tried to escape from the two Iguanen, who were holding him like a scarecrow. But he found that he was too weak to let go. The fruitless struggle amused both the Iwanin and Mizuki. Walking slowly towards the blonde, and now what do I do with you, Naruto-kun? The white-haired man wondered aloud, without his dark tone going unnoticed by anyone, not even the blonde preteen suspended in the air. I know. El Chunin exclaimed, snapping his fingers and tapping his left palm with his right hand. I'll tell you a secret that everyone in the village knows except you. Those who are 1 or 2 years older and those who are younger, do you want to know which one it is? Naruto shook his head slightly. Are you sure? I mean, it's about you, I thought you'd like to know. The blonde opened his eyes wide. He, of course, did not know a secret that involved him. He looked at the sense and wounded, who had tried to protect him moments before, without success. The man's face lit up with pain, fear, and Greek shame. He looked at Mizuki again with a frown. I figured as much. Curiosity killed the cat, or in this case, it killed the fox. You see, 11 years ago. Soon it will be 12. The biggest of all the Bijulo attacked our beautiful village. For no reason at all, but of course, you should know. We've only gone over this lesson about 7 times so far this year. The white-haired man shot a somber glance at the bloodied man on the ground, who blushed slightly. And as you know, he attacked on October 9th and wasn't defeated until October 10th. The white-haired Chunin was looking at Naruto again. You were born on October 10th, the same year the Kyuubi attacked the village. The blonde narrowed his eyes, confused, wondering why the traitor was giving him a history lesson. Instead of the secret he had promised to tell him. He opened his mouth, but Mizuki closed the small space separating him and covered his mouth with a finger, pressing his lips hard to prevent him from interrupting him. If you're going to interrupt me, Naruto-kun, I won't tell you the rest of the secret, got it? The blonde man grunted, but nodded. Fine. You were born the same night the Kyuubi was defeated. Naruto felt one of the Iwanin shudder, and cocked his head as best he could to understand why he had shuddered. Mizuki's finger turned into a 3-fingered grip, grabbed him by the chin, and pulled him back so that he looked into his eyes. I'm not finished, Espado. So I would like you to give me your full attention. The man took a deep breath before continuing with the story he had to tell. The secret that revolves only around you, Naruto-kun, is that, in reality, the Yondaime did not kill the Kyuubi. No, and if he, a simple man, had been able to kill the Kyuubi in combat, other nations would have done the same to the demons that attacked their villages, and no, instead, he wounded the demon with an unknown jutsu. A white flash, bright purple, and a huge wave of chakra. The Kyuubi disappeared, the Yonda, and Myokai was dead, face down on the ground, with his mouth full of blood, mud and grass. And you, lying on a stone altar, surrounded by candles, and Mizuki came closer, put his mouth to Naruto's left ear, and spoke in a low voice. The Kirib never died, Naruto-kun, you want to know what happened to him. Why do they always tease you, make fun of you, because no one, not even Iruka-sensei, appreciates you? The blonde managed to contain his fear and nodded half-heartedly. Mizuki's smile widened. The Kyuubi did not die, instead, the Yondaime forced him to change his body. With a small blonde baby with black eyes and whisker marks on his cheeks. Naruto took a deep breath and felt his body shaking furiously. The incident made the white-haired Chunin in front of him laugh out loud. And laughing at his full height, suddenly much more intimidating, the man opened his mouth once more. He's not as dumb as you want us to think, ha Kyuubi. Kakyubi. Naruto exhaled, frantic. The man nodded. The sounds faded away as his heartbeat quickly filled his ears, and then, like an angry bee protecting its hive, the pain that had tormented him for the past few days began to increase. Small punctures turned into stabs, and the burning sensation turned into liquid fire. The blonde was in such a state of shock, fear and pain that he didn't even realize that the Iwanin, who had shuddered at the mention of the Kyuubi, had thrown him to the ground and started yelling at Mizuki. His heart started racing, and the world around him started spinning. Tai and Jin, a Chunin-ranked shinobi from Iwagakure, stared at the white-haired man named Mizuki. It was, as he confessed upon meeting the 2 nights before, in an unidentified cave that once housed a bear. Although, according to Mizuki, the bear had been killed as a child, as a safety measure. A shinobi born in Konoha, who was looking to break away from the blade and make a name for himself in the world. They should have known there was something wrong with the man when he told them his plan. The man's plan was initially based on the failure of a young Kyosuke. Qualifications had been declining since he started at Konoha Shinobi Academy at the age of 6. He had taken the Genin exam twice and failed both times. Although he now mastered 2 of the 3 trivial techniques that the Konoha Academy required of its students. But he had never been able to create a single clone, let alone 2. After failing the exam, Mizuki told them that he was sure that, like the previous times, the boy would wander around the village, not wanting to be seen or ridiculed by his classmates. I would find him and tell him a fake method to become Genin. Stealing one of the most coveted artifacts from the Kanowagakure Cage Tower, the Sacred Sealing Scroll. Better known as the Scroll of Seals, a treasure that would make the Tsuchikage sing like a cat in heat. After the boy got the scroll, Mizuki told them that she would signal him to head to the cabin in front of the one they were in. Mizuki planned to reveal themselves first, and then when he ordered, they would show up to help deal with the boy. And anyone who showed up to help them, and they would be found out. It was supposed to be a trick-type job to kill Dribble and Willy, but that's what it had become. It was something much more dangerous, more than just being as close to the walls of Konoha as they were, especially with patrols outside, looking for the little blonde who had appeared with the scroll. Neither Tai nor Jin believed that Mizuki was an intelligent man, nor particularly sane. His constant mocking smiles and murmured reveries, full of fame and infamy, had accompanied them from the cave to the hut. And as he was leaving to take up his post, they had proved that the man was mentally unstable. However, the pay was the pay. It didn't matter if the client's mind was half melted by crazy dreams. Now, however, as they watched the white-haired man approaching the fallen scroll, with that mocking smile etched on his face, they knew that they should have stopped attending to the man's request as soon. They discovered his crazy ramblings. When the man who had hired them let out the message that the boy was a Hinshiriki, the two Iwanan went crazy. In retrospect, throwing the child to the ground was probably not the smartest thing to do, considering the fact that the child was the strongest Vihulu Hinshiriki that it existed. But it was better than actively trying to kill him and awaken the demonic energy that was running through his body, as they had been initially hired to do. Growing up in Iowa, listening to the stories of their own Hinshiriki, hearing about their conflicts, their struggles, and, of course, their destructive capabilities, it made the two men tremble with fear for the boy who was lying on the ground, struggling and moaning, trying to lift his head and his body. Tai looked at Jin and, with narrowed eyes, nodded. Jin nodded silently. Together, they took a few steps away from the Hinshiriki and approached the bastard, who had knowingly forced them to piss off a boy with enough power to lay waste to an entire village if provoked long enough. "What the hell does this mean, Mizuki?" Tai barked as he approached the man with white hair. He stopped his step and looked over his back at Tai-Jin. "Didn't you say anything about the kid being a Hinshiriki?" "Didn't I?" Mizuki asked, feigning confusion. The feint, if it had been used on someone who had not been a shadow warrior with many years of experience reading between the lines, it might have worked. But since the two men were ninjas and had been reading between the lines for years, and the smile that was drawn on Mizuki's face just seconds after asking her question, the ruse failed right away. "It was my fault," he apologized in a mocking tone. "I must have forgotten." With his face contracted with anger, Jin opened his mouth and pounced on the white-haired bastard. "Asshole!" he barked. "Do you have any idea what you do? What are you getting into?" Mizuki's response was to stop smiling and shrug her shoulders. "Does it matter?" the man asked, putting his left hand to his ear and dragging it away, clearly indifferent to what Jinoda and they had to say. "I mean, the kid got the scroll. Iruka is practically dead, and the boy is about to meet the executioner. Who cares what I do with Oa?" He paused and looked at them quickly before squinting. "Don't tell me you're afraid. To big, strong and proud Iowa ninjas like you. Are you afraid that Kono Agakure will denounce you for killing one or two members of your village? Please. What the fuck are you talking about, asshole?" Jin shouted, slightly tilting his head forward as he shouted at the white-haired Chunin. "I'm not afraid of Konoha. Neither of us." He pointed to Naruto, who, for a moment, had given up getting up. "That boy is a Hinshiriki, someone with the ability to destroy entire villages, and you are here talking about killing him. As if you were cutting cheese or fruit. If you kill that child, Mizuki, the only thing you will get is to submit to a hellish world before he kills you." Tai added, "Trust us. We've already seen the Hinshiriki use their powers, and if there's one thing that will provoke the wrath and power of the demon stalking them, it's trying to kill their host. And whatever the white-haired man said with a nonchalant shrug. If they want to get away, so be it. Get out of here. But they will not be paid or given any recognition. Haha. Tai's incredulous laughter pierced the air, interrupting the white-haired man's speech. Do you think money and recognition are enough for us to be here to be skewered by a Hinchiriki? Do whatever you want, Mizuki, die if you want. Because if you really think that you can try to kill a Hinchiriki without consequences, you are much more stupid and crazy than we thought. Tai crouched down, and Jin imitated him. Have fun, Mizuki. I hope the boy breaks you in two. With that said, both of them and Wanin jumped into the canopy, leaving the madman alone with the Hinchiriki and the academy instructor down. Faggots, Mizuki blurted out as she heard her assistant running away. Too scared to finish a job, he turned to Naruto and sighed. I guess it's just you and me, Naruto. He pulled a kunai out of his gun bag and approached the boy with a murderous glint in his eyes. Still on his stomach, the boy moaned painfully as he tried to get up. The screaming had stopped, and even through the spinning world, Naruto could sense that somehow. What Mizuki had told him about being the Kyuubi had made the two Iwanin extremely angry. Grunting painfully, Naruto managed to sit up to finally see what was going on. And in a way I wish I hadn't. Stalking towards him like a wild cat was Mizuki, kunai in hand, and with a malicious smile drawn on her face. The man's eyes were shining with a hidden energy that seemed to absorb the air around Naruto's head, making it extremely difficult for him to breathe. What is this? The blonde asked himself as he tried to swallow air, trying to get it into his lungs. Is it some kind of jutsu? I wish I could say it was fun, Naruto. Oops, I mean, Kyuubi, the white-haired man teased as he shortened the ever-shrinking distance between the blonde and him. But I have places to visit. People to see dead, and of course, villages to betray and then destroy. Mizuki stopped about 30 centimeters from Naruto, spun the kunai in his hand once, twice, 3 times, before catching it firmly with his hand. Right, with the handle in the hand, the blade pointing downwards, under his palm. Raising his arm above his head, Mizuki's eyes widened with excitement seconds before pouncing on the blonde. The gun, surging through the midnight air, was pointed at the blonde man's neck. At the sight of the weapon's arc, the paralyzing body pain vanished in a dull throb, as the blonde instinctively flattened himself to the ground and quickly rolled out of the way, effectively dodging the kunai's descent. Damn it, Kyuubi! Snarled the madman as he reeled from his mistake. Stay still so I can kill you. The white-haired man straightened up and charged at Naruto. Still lying on the ground, noticing the man's onslaught, he continued rolling to get away from him. She barely managed to stay in front of him and his gun until the man threw it at her. Fortunately, blinded by anger and rage, the man had aimed at him and not at where Naruto would have rolled, which turned the mistake into a blessing in disguise, although it almost caused him to lose bladder control. I need to stop spinning and do something, Naruto said to himself while looking at the crib, and that he had almost hit it, sticking out of the ground. The sound of metal sliding against metal caught the blonde's attention. Turning his gaze from the kunai sticking out of the ground to the new sound, Naruto felt his eyes getting as big as they could. When Mizuki took out a large metal shuriken, a windmill shuriken if he remembered correctly class, and placed his right hand inside the large hole in the center of the weapon. Are you going to throw it at me? The blonde asked. To his surprise, the man did not throw it. Instead, he began to twist it around his right hand. After 5 or 6 spins, the man stopped spinning it with his hand, and then he started spinning it at an incredible speed. With what must have been chakra, the sound it created when spinning was appalling, like a big fan standing at full power. When the man brandished it, the sounds fluctuated terribly, and, combined with the murderous face Mizuki now had, Naruto felt the blood leave his face. Scared? The white-haired man asked sarcastically. Not bothering to give the blonde a chance to respond, the Chunin pounced on him, throwing his swivel gun at him. To avoid being cut into pieces, Naruto forced himself to roll several more times, to dodge the spinning deadly sword seconds before it reached him. The sound of the fabric tearing and the earth being torn filled the air. As he stopped, Naruto quickly looked down. His left shoulder, which seconds before had been completely covered by his jumpsuit, now sported a large clean tear. And a wide, shallow, and, fortunately, thin cut. The sound of footsteps and fan blades filled his ears. Looking up, the blonde noticed Mizuki's descending arm. The great sword arched towards him once more. Once again forcing him to move, the blonde rolled to dodge the big sword. As it touched the earth, the sword dug up large clods and threw stones into the air, filling the small clearing with debris. When he stopped, he felt a stinging emanating from his chest and tried. "Examine yourself." However, unlike the last 2 times, Mizuki didn't stop to see if she had caught up with him. Instead, she pulled her weapon out of the ground and ran after him. Rolling preemptively, Naruto tried to get further and further away from Mizuki. Every shot just allowed him to get away. Inches of another frenzied attack from the spinning shuriken of death. The evasion continued like this until Naruto found himself rolling directly against the trunk of a large oak tree. Eyes wide with fear, Naruto turned his body and planted his hands on the ground, watching as Mizuki's attacks got closer and closer. Attacking the blonde like a frenzied warrior, lost in bloodlust. Mizuki's expression changed as he realized that Naruto's evasion had come to an end. He concentrated more chakra in his hand and in the weapon spinning around him, creating an even louder and more terrifying sound that filled the forest around him, and attacked the boy with all the strength and speed he could. Knowing that there was nowhere to roll to evade the attack, Naruto once again acted on instinct, only this time. Instead of evading and dodging, he curled up. He raised his arms to try to deflect as much damage as possible from the attack, even if, deep down, he knew that he was not going to save him. For a split second, as he raised his arms to protect himself, Naruto felt a burning sensation that seemed to travel down his arms, curling up from his arms all the way to the bottom of his dolls. And then, a sharp, blinding pain that lasted maybe a millisecond. It went through her wrists and then, with a small amount of force that seemed to be on par with the recoil of an elastic band that returns to its place after being pulled and let fly. He vanished. The swaying sound of gurgling tones and gusts of air soon hit the area for a split second, before the sound of spinning metal making its way through the wood filled the air. Milliseconds later, a shriek of pain echoed throughout the forest. Opening his eyes suddenly, Naruto ignored the strange weight that seemed to have fallen on his head during the last attack, and the itch on his wrists, and looked at his attacker. Mizuki was staggering backwards, moving away from him. He was holding his right arm with his left hand, screaming in pain at the sight of 2 small brown structures, resembling twigs, which protruded from his wrist and arm. Blood was emanating from the 2 small wounds and falling to the forest floor. "What did you do?" The man screamed painfully as he tried to pull the spikes out of his wrist and arm. However, when he touched them, the man pulled his hand away. Left hand, and his cries of pain increased both in duration and sound. "Did I do that?" the blonde asked himself as he sat under the tree under which Mizuki had trapped him less than a minute ago. A sudden creaking of wood behind her interrupted her thoughts. He turned his head, shaking off the bolt, and looked up at the huge shuriken that sat in the middle of the trunk of the great tree. A large cut with the smell of weeds, uneven in depth, length, or width, had left the tree with little to stand upright. The crackling of the wood fibers filled the air as the big tree started swinging towards him. Rolling over on his hands and knees, Naruto pushed his aching body to the limit as he ran away from the falling tree. Izumo and Kateksu, accompanied by Akamichi Chusa, ran through the thick forests surrounding their village in search of the blonde thief. His search, almost completed the 2nd hour, was beginning to seem futile, but until he was found, or until the Okage suspended it, it was his duty to continue looking for the boy and the scroll he had stolen from the tower. It wasn't until a sharp, painful scream filled the air that they felt they had taken the right direction in their quest. "This way," Chusa declared as he looked to the right, ducking under a low branch in search of the one who had shouted seconds earlier. The 2 Chunin nodded silently and followed the Jounin. Suddenly, with the rumbling of thunder, the earth began to shake violently. "An earthquake?" Izumo asked his allies. Neither Katetsu nor Chusa answered, before they stopped running and got ready. But, as suddenly as it had started, the noise and shaking stopped, leaving the three shinobi bewildered. And it is not an earthquake, and the great ninja began. Inhaling deeply, the smell of freshly stirred earth filled his senses. And a tree, and nodded in the direction of the smell. This way. Without waiting for the two chunin to follow him, Chusa headed towards the freshly removed earth and the fallen tree. Izumo and Katezu looked at each other briefly before running off after the jounin. The first thing Chusa saw when he arrived at a now destroyed clearing was a large fallen tree crushing a small hut. Fortunately, judging by the small and unfortunately destroyed flag that had been placed to the north of said hut, it was a simulated hut used to train genin and chunin in stealth. For now, ignoring the destroyed hut and the large oak tree that had fallen on it, the man discovered something that made his blood run cold. Less than 4.5 meters from the fallen oak tree, the now former instructor of his son's academy, Umino Iruka, was lying face down. Rushing to examine the man, Chusa's nose filled with the smell of spilled blood. Kneeling down next to the unconscious man, Chusa noticed the depth of his wounds. With his fingers lightly brushing his legs, the jounin felt his right index finger running along the wound that ran along the man's left leg. He quickly placed his fingers on the man's neck and waited to see if he had a pulse. Bago and bum, and, cursing under his breath, Chusa reached into his medicine cabinet and pulled out a blood restorative pill. He bit it before putting it in the chunin's mouth. With his hands, he gently massaged the injured man's throat, making him swallow the pill. The burly man was waiting for the academy instructor to recover. Chusa. The sound of his two chunin companions making their way through the undergrowth pulled his head away from the injured chunin and directed it towards his position. "What's the matter?" Izumo asked as he ran towards him, closely followed by Katetsu. Seeing the chunin fallen under the jounin's body, they frowned. "Is he dead?" Chusa shook his head. "Not yet. I forced him to swallow a blood pill as a last resort. But he may not make it. Not with the damage he suffered and the amount of blood he's already lost." He paused. "Have one of you take him to the hospital. I'm going to see if I can find our thief turned murderer." Katezu and Izumo looked at each other. "I'll take Iruka to the hospital," Izumo offered as he bent down to pick up the injured chunin, though he just didn't want to aggravate the man's injuries further, and disappeared with Shunsin. "Take care, Hut," warned Katezu al-Jounin, who looked at him strangely. "Naruto may not be the smartest kid in the world, and he may not even be a genin. But he's a master at hiding when he doesn't want to be found. Believe me, I've had to look for the little brat before." The jounin nodded before turning to observe the destroyed clearing. "And check for traps. That bastard is pretty good with them too," Josa felt again. As the two shinobi slowly walked through the clearing, Choza and Katezu could clearly see the large indentations in the earth. They did not know what had provoked them, but they must have been powerful to tear the earth as much as they did. After 5 minutes of slow searching, Katezu made his way to the stump of the newly felled tree. "At first, I didn't expect to see anything, except maybe a body crushed by the big tree. But after a minute of searching, he discovered the white-haired assistant instructor, who assisted many instructors at the academy. Not just Iruka. He was unconscious, probably due to the proximity of the fallen tree. He bent down to see if the man was still alive, and began to examine him. Pressing Mizuki's neck with his fingers, he took her pulse. The relatively steady heartbeat allowed the conscious Chun-en to sigh in peace before continuing. As he examined her body with his gaze, cursing the murky moonlight, he couldn't find anything wrong with her at first. It wasn't until he checked his right arm that he found the 2 spikes protruding from the hand and the woman. "Mizuki doll." "Chusa. I found Mizuki." The heaviest man turned his head towards Katezu. "Mizuki, wasn't he the one who told the Okage about this whole fiasco?" pondered the stout man. "Or it was Iruka." Something didn't add up, nothing did. As he got up, intending to help Katezu with the other fallen academy instructor, something big and white caught his eye. As he turned to face him, the burly man instantly recognized him. The scroll started to head towards the artifact, but stopped when he remembered Katezu's words. "Tetsu?" Looking around, he saw nothing out of place. Apart from the fallen tree and the fallen second academy instructor, he did not see any wire thread shining in the moonlight, nor did he perceive anything out of place. Walking slowly towards the scroll, the Jounin kicked it, and nothing happened. Deciding that the scroll was not trapped, the big man finally bent down and picked it up. With the scroll safely in his hands, Chusa stood up, ready to call the search for the blonde thief to an end. When he got up, he saw a small package of orange on the side of the collapsed building. Is that it? Chusa reflected. Lifting the scroll to his left shoulder, the burly man carefully approached the package of oranges. Once close, he could see the blonde thief's face, covered with dirt and with a little blood. His body trembled from time to time, but other than that, the boy seemed completely insensitive to his surroundings. Chusa pushed him with his right foot, and when the guy did not even move to hit him, he realized that, despite the shaking, the preteen was definitely unconscious. "Katezu?" he barked, turning his head towards the Chunin. "Take Mizuki to the hospital, and then go to inform the Okage. If you get there before me, tell him I have the scroll and our young thief." "Understood." The Chunin nodded and bent down to grab Mizuki and take him to the hospital. With a cloud of smoke announcing his departure, Chusa turned to the blonde preteen and silently wondered what exactly had happened. It is impossible for a student who dropped out of the academy to have faced two fully trained chunin, not to mention a guy of his age, who, like my own son, does not like to read or study. Knowing that one of the main arteries goes through your legs, it didn't make sense. Leaving the scroll on the floor, Chusa took a smaller scroll out of his vest pocket and undid the seal that kept it closed. Biting his thumb, the burly man slow wiped his body fluid on the paper roll and made several quick hand stamps. In a small cloud of smoke, two objects appeared: a rope and a pair of chakra-devouring handcuffs. Although something in the back of her mind was telling her that the boy hadn't done what she initially thought he'd done, he was still a suspect and a thief in the matter. And like all thieves, there were certain precautions that had to be taken before moving them. Sarutobi and Ruzan stared at the big Jounin who, just as Katezu had told him he would do after dropping Mizuki off at the hospital, had just arrived with, on the scroll of the seals over the left shoulder and the little blonde and unconscious thief in the right hand, tied and handcuffed. "Oksama," Chusa greeted him warily. "I found the scroll and the child, as ordered." Irisina felt. "Thank you, Chusa-san." The Okage thanked the man for his service. "If you'd be so kind, put Naruto on the couch. I'll take the scroll." As ordered, Chusa handed the scroll to the short Okage before escorting the boy to the sofa and sitting him down. As he stood up, Chusa kept his gaze fixed on the blonde, visibly absorbed in his thoughts. Irisin noticed the action. "Is something wrong, Chusa? I find it hard to believe that a boy like this, even with the possible help of the Kyugi, could have incapacitated to shinobi of Chunin rank," Okage-sama, the man stated. "I've heard stories of places like in Iowa where the Hinchuriki can easily destroy entire villages. But I've never heard of or seen this guy use the Kyugi's powers, and if he did, why are we still here? Surely he would have killed us, or left a trail of destruction through the forest, since his lifetime, right? You have a sharp mind on par with your comrade Shikaku." Choza praised Irisin, making him blush slightly despite the atmosphere surrounding them. "In fact, I know exactly what happened in the forest, but I can't prove it, and although my word is law, this robbery has reached so many ears that it will all have happened by mid-morning. When that happens, I'll have to have something to appease the rest of the village, besides just because I'm the Okage, and what I say gets done." He walked over to his desk and slowly sat down behind it. "I'm afraid that until Iruka and Mizuki wake up, Naruto will be a while in a cell." "Who did it?" Chusa asked. "I cannot tell you, Chusa," said the Okage sadly. "These walls that surround us, the floors that are below and above us, they all have mice running around." Chusa immediately understood the meaning, and he nodded. "However, Chusa, I think it's about time you went home and got some sleep. After tonight's activities, I think we all need to sleep." "Thank you, Okage-sama," Chusa said, bowing slightly before leaving the office and returning home. Feathers. Upon waking up, Naruto was frightened by what he found around him. To his left, a large and thick stone wall stood, which was reflected in the wall that surrounded his right and his back. Possibly the scariest thing about his new home was right in front of him. A large metal grating. Uzumaki Naruto realized where he was in prison. Life in prison was very similar to what Iruka-sensei had informed him, as well as the rest of the class, a year ago. Gloomy walls without windows, a toilet and a sink, both extremely worn. States and dirty, and, depending on the size of the cell, between 1 and 5 beds. Which meant that they would probably have a cellmate. Fortunately, his cell had only 2 beds, and for the first 5 days of his incarceration, he had been alone in the cell. On the 6th day, he brought a cellmate with him. He was asleep when the cell door opened. The sound of metal crashing against metal and the grunts that accompanied the opening of the iron door woke him up. And he quickly panicked. One of the things Iruka-sensei had told them in class was that there were people in prison who forced their cellmates to do extremely disgusting and unpleasant things to them. Naruto hid his gaze on the nearest wall, covering his head with the thin blanket he had been given in prison, praying that this person, his new cellmate, was not one of those kind of people. After the prison guards pushed this prisoner inside the cell, they slammed the door shut. An extremely loud and furious rumble echoed throughout the jail as the door latched and closed. Not knowing what to do, Naruto kept his eyes fixed on the wall next to his cot. She had no idea that her cellmate was a girl until early the next morning, when the guards brought breakfast. He couldn't get a good look at the girl until dinner, but at a glance, he realized that she was young, maybe a few more years older than him. He had long brown hair and a rather pale complexion. That was all. He kept his face as hidden as possible as he grabbed a tray and slipped back to his cot, facing the wall, eating in silence. There were no lunches at the jail. Naruto found out on the first day. The girl, at least once, had taken a look at the cell door, which Naruto thought must be around noon. He thought about telling her, but he didn't. He wasn't sure she would have listened to him even if she had. Once dinner arrived, Naruto finally got a better look at his cellmate. Her complexion was pale, but it was not a sickly pallor. He had amber eyes and, because of the slight bulge on the front of his shirt, even slouched forward, he had a considerable bust. Bigger than Sakura's, he noticed. She couldn't see how long her hair was left. The light inside the cell came from torches and was greedily absorbed by the shadows inhabiting the cell. As it curved around the older girl's body, they both ate in silence. No sound came out of their mouths while having. For a whole day and then some, neither of them spoke. Naruto opted for silence. Thinking about what would happen to him now that he was a fellow prisoner, he kept it quiet. Sleep prevented him for most of the night. Since there were no clocks in the prison, something Naruto had looked for during his first day of incarceration. He didn't know when he fell asleep. It wasn't until his cellmate woke him up that he found out that he had fallen asleep sometime in the early morning. It was the first time the older girl recognized him and spoke to him. "If you're not going to eat, I can eat your breakfast." Her voice, though feminine, was more serious than he had believed. Of course, he had been comparing her to the girls in his class. Like Sakura, Hino, and Nada, and even with one of the bullies in the class. Annie? Maybe, just maybe. Like the boys' voices, the girls' voices changed with age, becoming a little more serious. Still dazed, Naruto looked at the food tray on the stone floor, trying to see what it was. I could only see a small part of the tray. I only saw toast and what looked like new scrambled eggs. He looked at the girl, a little more attentive to his surroundings now that he was. I was a little more awake. She was beautiful, no doubt. Her amber eyes enhanced the rest of her face. Her nose and cheeks, which seemed to melt without complexion, were worn down like those of some girls I had seen in class. He had no pimples and no arm, and except for a few minor cuts and a fading bruise, probably during his arrest. There was no flaw that I could find in him, except one. Although her cheeks were in good health, she could see that a little bone was beginning to protrude, albeit barely, while the skin on her cheeks was sinking. Something he used to find in his own mirror as a child. Before I lived in the Okage nursing home. Before they have enough food to support themselves. She had been, judging by her one imperfection, starving to death. Feeling sorry for her, Naruto nodded. Yes, you can eat it. A small, but grateful smile blossomed on his face, and he quickly disguised it before turning around and practically throwing himself on the tray. Naruto watched as she pounced on what until just a few moments ago had been her breakfast. I was barely breathing as I devoured the food. From the way he was eating, Naruto almost nodded. His assumption was correct. She was starving to death. He knew that it was not polite to watch her devour the food as he had done, but a combination of morbid fascination and persistent waves of sleep kept him with his eyes riveted on the scene. It wasn't until the girl had almost finished the tray that she turned her head and found him staring at her. She blushed instantly and controlled the remaining bites. After finishing the tray with all the remaining food, including the crumbs, the older girl finished the water and then, after putting the cup back on the tray, pushed it towards the cell door and returned to her cot. The two teenagers remained silent for most of the day. In fact, it wasn't until the following midnight that they spoke again. The conversation did not arise out of desire, but out of necessity. It said a cell deep inside the jail turned into a noisy pit of anger and violence. She didn't wake him up because he was tired from the night before, so he slept. In fact, until he felt something brushing against him in his sleep, he had been able to ignore the noise. The feeling of another body repeatedly brushing against his finally woke him up. He had never thought about it until that night, but he was glad that the torches remained lit throughout the night. Blinking, although his eyes hurt, the blonde could easily see his cellmate curled up next to him. Next to him, with his head in his hands, and squeezing his ears with all his might. Her eyes were closed and, although she could barely see them in the gloom, she managed to catch the streaks of tears cascading down her face, flowing from her eyes. Hey, and his voice, tired and armchair, made the older girl jump. He sat up, afraid that something was wrong, and tried again. She jumped again. Turning her head to him, opening her eyes, the older girl took her hands away from her ears and held them out to him in an instant. It happened quickly, leaving him stunned for several moments. There, in a cell, an older girl was hugging him possessively, crying against his body as the sounds of violence filled the prison. Added to the older girl's sobs, it was a scene that sent shivers down her spine. For what could have been countless hours, the girl sobbed, soaking her shirt and chest with her tears. She didn't say anything while crying, which to him was a little strange. I didn't know how to calm down crying girls or women, but in all the series I had been able to watch. In all the movies he had watched on the sly, and most of them were romantic, when the female lead broke down and cried inconsolably. Like the one who had stuck to him, they used to stop after a few minutes of being hugged or comforted. But of course, it was said with sadness, "This is not a movie, and this is real life." No, it wasn't. In the prison, there was no notion of time, at least until the guards arrived with breakfast or dinner. The prison was built specifically to confuse its captives, making them believe that the outside world had abandoned them a long time ago, when in fact they coexisted. Iruka-sensei called it a psychological trick that the prison used on all its inmates. The prison was, or at least he thought it was, underground. That would be one of the reasons why there were no windows, and also the reason why, during the day, there was no additional light. Inside the prison, it made time slide slowly. "I am your master." A furious, though strangely victorious, scream echoed from the hallway, startling both Naruto and his Zelda sidekick. "Let you know this, because I have marked you. From here until the day you die, you will serve me as I tell you. Or I'll kill you. Let everyone know that prisoner 1809 is my bitch." Several shouts followed the declaration of ownership. Some were raucous cheers, while others were harsh orders telling the noisy man to shut up. Naruto almost expected more grunts and noises of flesh against flesh to invade the bowels of the prison. But fortunately, it seemed as if the man who had marked the property on someone else, probably his cellmate, marking whoever it was as one of the people Iruka-sensei had explained to him, and his classmates, for the moment, would have had enough. The prison quickly returned to a state of calm. It seemed that everyone around his cell was falling asleep. But for him and his Zelda sidekick, sleep seemed to have eluded them. Looking at his Zelda companion, who was still clinging to him, he noticed that although the sounds had stopped, she was still crying. Although not so loudly or so loudly. Deep down, I wanted to comfort her. But after going over all the dialogues and scenes he had seen in movies and TV, he realized that they were not only movie magic, making them fake, but also led the protagonists to find a bedroom, and to jump on each other, and even later. The girl seemed to swell up as a result of jumping on the boy, and later, to have a baby. I didn't want to have a baby, at least not yet. Seeing that all her knowledge was useless, she chose to keep silent and let the older girl cry. Fortunately, he wasn't the one who started the conversation. A few minutes later, the girl did. "And I'm sorry," and Naruto looked at her asking, why would he say something like that? Apparently, she could see his expression and elaborated, if only a little. "I'm sorry I did what I did," and she sobbed slightly, and wiped her eyes with her clothes as she turned away from him. "Hey, it's okay." He tried to downplay it. However, the girl did not want to know anything. "I'm serious," he emphasized. "I didn't mean to." He fell silent suddenly, with a shiver running down his spine. It brought back bad memories. Naruto frowned. Iruka-sensei never went into defense. Details about what happened in jail, but after how the man had called his cellmate a bitch, I was pretty sure it hadn't been nice. If someone had done something similar to the older girl who was her cellmate, Megumi faintly heard the girl's whisper, pulling it out of her breasts. Thoughts. Looking at her with eyes of good, she repeated, "Is my name Megumi?" "Oh, easy. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, and don't worry about this." He pointed to his shirt and the stained cot underneath. "I've dealt with worse things, like boiling water." The older girl opened her eyes wide at the confession. "The first time I tried to cook ramen, I poured it on myself." She ran a hand through her hair shyly. "It hurt like hell," she added quietly. "How old were you?" he asked in a low voice. Naruto frowned and looked at me at the ceiling, trying to remember. I think I was 5 years old. But I'm not 100% sure." "5?" she asked, surprised by his age. "And what about your siblings or parents?" "Grandparents." It wasn't the first time someone had asked him questions about his family life. However, it was one of the first times in a long time that someone didn't say it in an insulting way, as Kiva had done a few times during his fights at the academy. He tried to hide it, but the resentment that the question aroused in him was slightly glimpsed. "I don't have one," he explained in a low voice. "Orphan." It summed him up. The older girl nodded slowly and looked away. Sitting on her butt, she brought her knees to her chest and hugged them, staring at the stone floor. "Sometimes I wish I was an orphan," her comment shocked to Naruto like lightning. "Why is that?" he asked himself, unable to disguise the anger as he spoke, unintentionally scaring the older girl, who had turned her head sharply to look at him, her amber eyes wide with fear. Realizing what he had done, Naruto stopped and calmed down before opening his mouth again. "Why would anyone want to be an orphan? It's lonely and cruel, and people look down on you just for being an orphan. I would give anything to have a family. That someone would help me, protect me, and stand up to the abusers for me. That he loved me." "What?" Megumi interrupted him. "And sometimes Naruto and the family can be worse than any abuser," the girl said quietly, unconsciously pulling down her dress towards the crib, as if trying to hide something from the world. Naruto waited for him to continue, but seeing that he didn't say anything else, he bit his tongue. It was obvious that he did not want to talk about it. For several minutes, they remained silent, not saying anything to each other. It didn't take long for Megumi to push herself to the edge of the bed and plant her feet on the stone floor. Before she got up and staggered towards her bed, leaving Naruto alone and bewildered. How could a family be worse than an abuser? Naruto thought. Lying back on his cot, he ignored the slightly soaked mattress and stared at the ceiling, pondering the older girl's words. Although he did not realize it, the dream took hold of Megumi and himself. For 2 days after the girl's collapse, the two sat in relative silence. Only a few words were said to each other. Mostly when they told the other that they were using the bathroom or asked if he wanted some of his food, mostly Naruto. When he found a huge pile of beans or stalks of celery on her tray, something that Megumi accepted with an almost greedy manner. On the morning of his 10th day in prison, both he and his cellmate were surprised to see a pair of guards outside their cell. They remained silent, staring at Naruto furiously, but did nothing else. It wasn't until a tall, muscular man, wearing a black trench coat and a red scarf over his head, appeared before their eyes, that the two men did something. In this case, they took a few steps back from the cell. The man's gaze, cold and merciless, was fixed on Naruto. And very soon, a cruel and evil smile was drawn on his face. Normally, I would have left you to rot or hung you by the testicles. But it seems that someone has denied me such pleasure. The man's smile disappeared, but only slightly. A shiver ran down Naruto's back. Anyway, I think it's about time I introduced you to what other traitors get. He snapped his fingers, and one of the guards came forward with the cell key in his hand. Tell me what happened that night, Mizuki asked Yamanaka and Noichi al Chunin, pen and paper in hand. And so many things happened that night, especially when we found out that both Iruka and Naruto were planning to betray the village, and I don't know where to start, replied the Chunin in question. Holding back a sigh, Hinoichi decided to give the young man some advice. The beginning is probably for the best, the blonde shinobi suggested. Mizuki nodded. I do not know when Naruto and Iruka came up with the plan to steal the scroll. But I know that it revolved around the boy not passing the genie exam. How is that? Hinoichi asked, making a note on his notes blog. Naruto has always been so lousy with mania. F chakra as with control, probably due to the influence of the Kyugi, and that's why it has always been difficult for him to master the jutsus. It took him several years to master the technique in G, although now that he has managed to make it work for him, it is one of his best techniques. The blonde Jounin nodded and took several notes on his blog before instructing the man to continue. Anyway, one of the jutsus that annoys him the most is the bunsen. He couldn't make one even to save his life. Mizuki added with a slight smile. One that seemed to recall a rather funny snippet from a comedy routine. And for the past 2 years, since Iruka became the head instructor of the class, he has used the same graduation exam system. Kawerimi in Haibansin, mixed with some taijutsu and weapons tests. But the main 3 are the first 3. Once again, the blonde man took some notes on his notes blog. Last year, in the class across the street, young Rogel, the boy who couldn't use his chakra at all, was allowed to graduate, and became a genin under Madoge. Naruto, who had taken the exam the year before Iruka was promoted to head instructor of his class, thought that since Rogel was able to pass without creating a bunsen, he should be able to as well. Even though he planned to betray the village, Iruka has always been very strict with the rules, ever since we became genin. A way to cover up his plans. He didn't let Naruto pass without creating a bunsen, even though he did create 2. They weren't the prettiest and probably wouldn't fool a fly, but they were 2, and Noichi scored again. When I asked Iruka if he planned to move on to Naruto, pushing him into a team that would work on recovery skills for a while before doing any missions above the range of, as we have done before. Iruka refused and told Naruto that he had failed. What happened then? Well, I know that Naruto was thinking about the situation outside the academy, watching and glaring at the other students who had passed. He did it the year before too. I think this year, however, he heard some unflattering comments about him from some parents and older siblings of students. And when Iruka came to pick him up later, telling the boy about another way to pass the Genin exam. I think Naruto accepted without thinking, wanting to prove everyone wrong, Mizuki concluded. Nodding, Hinoichi finished writing his notes before looking back at the Chunin in front of him. Then Iruka incited Naruto to steal the scroll. Mizuki nodded. So how did Iruka end up with such a serious injury? Surely an academic-level student with the same academic level as the Hinchiriki could not know where the main arteries were. I'm not really sure how it happened, Mizuki began. I arrived after the injury, and with just enough time to confront Naruto before he ran away with the scroll. So it was you who cut down the big tree. It wasn't a question. Mizuki pondered it for a few brief seconds, but neither confirmed nor denied the accusation. Nodding, Hinoichi wrote down in his notebook again. Next question. He skipped the question, trying to figure out the information of the Chunin-level shinobi. We sent Inuzuka agents to investigate the scene after we rescued the three of them from the scene of the confrontation. Mizuki felt her heart racing. There were multiple reports of 2 more entities in the forest with you, Humino Iruka and Uzumaki Naruto. Do you know who they were? Having no idea what happened after the tree fell, Mizuki could only assume that because Iruka had found them so quickly, someone else had located them soon after. I only knew 2 others in that small clearing, and mentioning one of their names was irrefutable proof that their story was not at all true. I was told that I was found unconscious after the reinforcements found us. And Noichi nodded. I can only assume that it was 2 of the reinforcements that found us. Mum. Hinoichi stopped while scribbling on his notes blog. He started to open his mouth to ask another question. But the sound of a soft bell at the back of the room where they were conducting the interrogation, marking the end of the meeting. Well, it looks like we're done. For today, Tojizan, Hinoichi commented as he closed his notes blog and put the pen in his pocket before getting up. Bowing formally to the young man, the blonde Jounin waited for the latter to get up, returned his bow, and went to the door, opening it, leaving and closing it behind him, before sighing warily and stretching slightly. The sounds of struggling, choking screams and grunts of pain and shock, as well as the angry screams coming from outside his office, drew a small smile on his face. Hidden microphones had been placed all over his office. The tiny radios, placed where no one would think to look for them, had fulfilled their function of transmitting the Chunin's words to Hinoichi's superiors. Now it remains only to go and talk to Ibiki. Hinoichi found himself standing outside Mornio Ibiki's torture room, watching as Mitaras and Anko dangled a potentially venomous snake in front of the boy's face. I thought I would compliment you with some answers to the outstanding questions, Ibiki, he said as he looked at the taller man. The interrogator observed him before returning to the scene in front of them. The boy is innocent, the man with the scar declared brusquely. And Noichi blinked at the sight of the taller man, incredulous. But since I had to hold him until someone came to pick him up, we kept him here, asking him questions about the night. And the details surrounding it, how that guy managed to get so far in life. I don't know, but he's very lucky. How is that? That kid doesn't even know the difference between a main artery and a simple blood vessel. I didn't even know that Umanozen would have died if not for his training and his ability to suppress bleeding with his chakra. Well, I know you haven't complained about your lack of intelligence before. Although not too much, but from what I remember from his rants, he doesn't even know how babies are born, Dad. Or how it was several years ago. I thought boys would grow breasts like girls. And Noichi shook his head even. Believe me. I'm sure it's partly because he's an orphan and probably didn't have the best education before he entered the academy. But sometimes he makes me think about him. Yes, well, intoned Vicky, finally heading towards the door leading to the interrogation room, where both the boy in question and his purple-haired tormentor and pet snake were located. I hope he gets older, for everyone's sake. Hinoichi solemnly nodded and waited for the scar man to go rescue the blonde academic-level boy from the purple-haired Kunoichi. The sound of the door of the room where he had been held for who knows how long went completely unnoticed by him, as he concentrated on the dark snake that hung in front of his face. Her eyes were wide with fear and panic. Anko, the voice of the man who had taken him out of his cell the same day, sent a shiver down his spine. Instinctive as he remained sitting tied to the chair. I need to talk to you. Sk. The woman clicked her tongue sadly. You can't tell me to be here, he complained. The man must have shook his head, because Naruto didn't hear anything before the woman clicked her tongue. Again, and get the snake out of his face. He groaned as he walked towards the bedroom door. Her sandals clanged on the cold stone floor. The sound of the door closing behind them, indicating that they had both left the room, allowed Naruto to finally take a deep breath and move her head for the first time in a long time. This is the 46th, she remembered the words of the woman of mind when she replaced the man with the scar that very morning. I can't remember if she's poisonous, so if I were you, I'd make sure not to move around too much. She likes to bite. Crazy bitch, thought the blonde, trembling slightly at the thought of the purple-haired woman. She moved her head slightly, feeling a burning and pain running down her neck as she moved it from side to side. Her eyes filled with tears of pain. She tried to move her arms to wipe away the tears, but she remembered mostly because of things. Leather straps holding him to the chair he had been forced to sit in that he could not. The sound of the door opening stopped again any derogatory comments about the purple-haired snake woman or the man with the scar. Fearing that they would hear him and decide to do something even more unpleasant to him. He was saved from his new series of nightmares by the image of a tall, thin man with a jounin vest and long, pale blonde hair. Walking in front of him, holding a block of notes in one hand and a pen and a chair in the other. The man placed the chair right in front of him and sat down. She twisted slightly as she opened her notes blog and clicked on the tip of the pen, forcing the tip out the base. My name is Yamanaka Inoichi Uzumaki-san. He introduced himself almost formally. I came here to get answers, got it. Narrowing his eyes slightly, Naruto wondered about the man for a moment. There was something about him that I couldn't identify. I've seen it before, but where? He thought about it instead of the question I had asked him. Sighing, the man continued. Fine. He settled back in before running a finger through his notes blog and pausing on a question. So who was planning to steal the scroll on graduation night, Naruto? Naruto blinked like a burro. The man's new question interrupted her thoughts. What? He asked. The man frowned, but did nothing more. Instead, he repeated the question. Oh, sorry, did it look familiar? You've probably seen me around the academy once or twice, the older blonde informed the boy. My daughter is, or was, in your class. Oh, exclaimed the boy, opening his eyes wide as he recognized the man. You're Hino's father. I remember you already. You were the one who showed us that Kuna and Broken 2 years ago. That's who I am, that's what I did. The man nodded. However, we're not here to talk about that, Naruto. We're here to talk about what happened on prom night. I'm sorry, the boy apologized, an embarrassed expression on his face. And Noichi downplayed it with a gesture. The night you stole the scroll, it started all over again. Whose plan was it? You about Humino-san. Any remnants of the embarrassed look that once adorned the boy's face quickly faded away, and an angry expression was drawn on his face. Iruka-sensei didn't do anything. He snapped angrily, and his outburst made Hinoichi arch an eyebrow, slightly surprised. I'm sorry, Hinoichi began, writing in his notebook as he apologized. Was it just based on what Tojizan told me? What did that bastard tell you? The boy asked in a low, threatening tone. If he had not been tied to the chair, Hinoichi thought that the boy might have tried to attack him for accusing the injured man, whom he considered his older brother. Hinoichi took a deep breath and opened his mouth. Well, firm what he said, and firm what we based on our tests and questions, Yumanozen played with your feelings. He tried to make you see him as some kind of big brother, only to betray you and use you for his own ends. In this case, to get the scroll of the seals. Iruka-sensei didn't tell me to go get that stupid scroll. It was done by Mizuki Tem. Exclaimed the boy. That asshole told me about the makeup test, why? And I was so stupid, and I got so angry that I didn't pay attention to him. So you admit to stealing the scroll? Hinoichi asked. Naruto thought about the question that would probably condemn him for what happened that night, but thinking about what could happen to Iruka-sensei and what Mizuki would receive for capturing him only reaffirmed his determination. He nodded. Instantly, L. Jounin wrote down what he had just admitted on the blog. "All right," murmured the man. "Now, if Tojizan told you about the fake makeup exam, how did Yumanozan get to your location that night?" "Iruka-sensei has always been able to find me," Naruto muttered under his breath, looking down, ignoring the fading pain in his muscles. "It may take him a while, but he always finds me." "Has anyone else found you?" Hinoichi asked. Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I mean, others have discovered me before, like Gigi. But Iruka-sensei is the only one who finds me every time he tries. Even during the training at the academy, Mizuki Tem would give up an hour after the class started and go to find the other boys. After finding them all, I would take them inside and continue, while Iruka-sensei kept looking for me." "And you said it takes a while, didn't you?" "Well, yeah, I mean, who would think of looking for someone hiding under a bunch of roots? Especially if the hole where that person is hiding used to be from a skunk or a badger," Naruto replied. Hinoichi's right eyebrow raised for a few moments before lowering it as he continued to write on his notes blog. "So, Yumanozan found you in the forest. With the scroll, right?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah, he showed up out of nowhere and started yelling at me for stealing the scroll, and before I could tell him about the test, Mizuki and the two Iwanin showed up, and Noichi instinctively opened his eyes wide. He wrote something down furiously and insisted on the question. I don't remember their names well. I felt the body as if it were a single fire. Only from the inside out, but they held me while Mizuki Tem cut off Iruka's leg. Sensei very forcefully." He fell silent, remembering what happened after Mizuki attacked Iruka, but before the two Iwanin fled. "Oh," Naruto began in a solemn tone. "Mizuki told me that I was the Kyugi, which is kind of weird, I mean. I don't have a line or anything." And Noichi also wrote down the information. "What did he say?" "Well, he said something like the Yondaime didn't kill the Kyugi, but made him switch bodies with a baby, or something. I don't remember it well." And Noichi tried not to frown, and in general he succeeded, but from the way the boy looked at him, narrowing his eyes slightly as he observed his expression, he knew that something of that appeared. Luckily, the boy did not act and let it pass. "You don't believe what he said, do you?" the Jounin asked slowly. "It could have been a ruse to scare you, and the two Iwanin didn't think it was a ruse," the boy replied, a cautious tone overlapping his voice. "They pulled me aside and started yelling at Mizuki Tem. They called him stupid and said things like, 'Don't mess with the Hinchiriki, Mizuki. Fuck your money. We're getting the hell out of here.' And then they ran away." A sardonic smile was drawn on the boy's face before continuing. "That bastard got really angry when they ran away," Hinoichi nodded. Looking at his notes blog, Hinoichi decided to cut the conversation short. The boy, of course, had brought to light information that Mizuki would never have brought to light, even under the fear and pain of death. Getting to his feet, the man ignored him for a few seconds and went to the door, opened it and crossed it, closing it behind him, leaving Naruto alone once more. "Well, that's disturbing news," Anko muttered under his breath as the blonde entered the observation room after closing the door. "Iwa ha." Unfortunately, the blonde nodded. "He also says that he was thrown to the ground when Mizuki dropped, that he was the Kyugi Hinchiriki. They are probably already within the borders of Tsuchi no Kuni, or if they are not, breaking down Iba's doors in a desperate race to inform the Noki. You'd better take that new information to the Okage," and Noichi shouted and Vicky from her place in the room. "I'll have someone drive the brat to his office in a few minutes." "I will," he offered Anko, raising his right hand. Both men turned and looked at her in silence. "What?" "I'm surprised he didn't pee his pants when you showed him your pet, Anko." "I don't think he thinks very highly of you right now," Vicky commented. Anko scoffed. "Like I care what he thinks." He walked to the door and put a hand on the knob. "Besides, it'll be easier if she's not jumping around, happy and all that to get out of here," and Vicky thought about it, just like Hinoichi. Looking at each other, the two men shrugged. "Anyway, I have to take this to the Okage," El Jounin said, walking towards the other door. Reviewing the official reports, comparing them with the unofficial ones lying on his desk, Shimura Danzo remained impassive. The ideas and mental processes that were wandering around in his mind, both good and bad, were fading away as he reread and reread every little bit. Toyi Mizuki, Chunin-level ninja, just by his title. Although idiotic and intolerant, he kept his anger and fear under control long enough to look for possible new employers and helpers to help him in his conquest. If the white-haired man had been sensible and less intolerant, he would have been promoted for his effort and ability. Instead of being under arrest in the village for murdering his teammates on a mission several years earlier. However, the man had allied himself with someone whom he could not forgive. Orochimaru paused briefly as he named his friend's former student. Why would Orochimaru ally with someone like Mizuki? Was it because he was a relatively strong shinobi? Or was it because he held a grudge against Konoha and the willingness to do something about it? Obviously, the idea of stealing the scroll was Orochimaru's plan. His incessant quest for immortality practically forced him, he shouted at him, to steal the scroll. Just in case the answer resided inside. It was unclear whether the madman planned to keep the wayward Chunin nearby after handing him the scroll. Although, the pale-skinned man being the mastermind, he would have squeezed all the information about the village in its current state out of it. Taking a look at the unofficial report that had just arrived from the Inokuni Northwest frontier, not more than an hour ago. I wonder if this will be enough to change the opinion of that old monkey. The sun hung low in the orange-red sky. The mountains and forests surrounding the vicinity of the village swallowed the big yellow orb. As dark night clouds marched from east to west, chasing the sun, devouring its rays of light as day turned to night. Tired, hungry, mentally scarred, and scared of women with purple hair, and with a new healthy fear of snakes. Naruto was walking painfully. With his head down, his eyes half open, barely noticing where he was currently, and where he needed to take a step or turn. To redirect himself, or just get out of the way. From someone. The blonde ditched his favorite restaurant in favor of sleeping in his own bed, for the first time in almost 11 days. And Gigi was not very happy with me, and mentally reviewed the last 3 hours while collapsing at home. But how was I supposed to know there wasn't a recovery test? Well, yes. I wasn't offered a makeup test the first 2 times. But maybe it was something new. It was plausible, even Gigi had admitted it. But the fact that he had been ordered to lift such an important relic from the village should have been a clue, and like a fool, he simply accepted it and carried out the action. Tightly squeezing a small lump in his left hand, with a mixture of fear and anger, the blonde took a quick look at his new headband. And Gigi is right, and after what I did, I don't deserve this, and I don't deserve to be a ninja, and not yet, at least I do. You got over it anyway. Danzo asked his old friend as he looked out the large window of his office, both of them watching the sunset behind the trees. Although he stole the scroll, which would normally be grounds for hanging like any other traitor, he was tricked by someone who was actively looking for it to use it against us. It was our luck, and the boys, that Mizuki's anger, fear, and intolerance overcame him, and allowed Naruto to survive long enough for Mizuki to make a slip. Danzo did not nod, but hummed under his breath. And medical reports indicate that Mizuki had 2 small wounds on her right arm. One, a small stab wound to the wrist, and another that almost pierced his right hand, and the cause of the injuries was once known. They knew what caused the injuries, Danzo answered and loosened, looking sidelong at his comrade. They just don't know where they came from, or what they were made of. Any information helps, Sarutobi, Danzo growled. And before you try to do that I'm the Okage nonsense to me, listen and obey. The crippled man took his hand away from the cane, put it in the top of his uniform, and rummaged for something. An instant passed before the cripple took out his hand, where in his bag there were 3 thin folders. He handed them over to the Okage. I received information from the base of our tree that a couple of Iwanin were seen running towards our northwest border, as if the grannies from hell had marked them as their infernal companions. He saluted and opened the first file, and looked at the information it contained. Did they only catch one? Whispered the Sandame, the anger evident in his voice. Unfortunately, Sarutobi answered Danzo by nodding quickly. He managed to escape, while his comrade practically sacrificed himself to allow him to return to Iwagakure. And since it takes almost 3 days for a bird to fly from the border to our location, with only minimal stops allowed, it is certain that the man has already crossed to Tsuchi no Kuni, the Sandame concluded. Danzo nodded. Noki will find out the identity of our Hinshiriki next week. And damn and read the other files, Sarutobi, Danzo urged his counterpart as he turned around and headed for the door. You've rejected it time and time again, but this time, I implore you to consider it. Especially now that the Noki will have information about Uzumaki Naruto. That said, the crippled man left Irizen alone in his office, contemplating the 3 folders in his hands. As the last few seconds of sunlight were swallowed up by the forest and the approaching night. With the headband tied to his left knee, Naruto nodded sharply in front of the mirror. With a serious and determined expression, she turned to the bathroom door and ran out. I'll prove it to you, Gigi, he said to himself as he walked out the front door of his apartment, stopping only for a moment to lock it once. You go outside before you run back out. The seriousness was still on his face. I'll prove to you that I deserve it. Despite the internal struggle he had been having with himself for the last 9 hours or so since he left the Okage's office the night before, Naruto was still on the same page. With Gigi, he hadn't earned the right to be a genin. I didn't deserve it at all. And although he didn't quite understand why the old man had promoted him, even after scolding him, he was slightly pleased. Even if I hadn't passed the right way, even if I couldn't perform Bunsenjutsu like everyone else, the others in his class, I had worked long and hard to get where I was. If Gigi didn't think he deserved to be a genin, he would have to prove him wrong. Noki held back a sigh as she listened to Taki's representative talk nonstop about reducing the costs of the wood and stone that the smaller nation imported from its own larger nation. Despite telling the representative that he could not do anything about it, that only the daimyo could, the man did not listen, and did not fall. And also, Tsuchikage-sama. With the costs of wood and stone reduced, we could strengthen our defenses and expand slightly to the west, away from Konohagakure and closer to Tiwa. Look, Mugen. I've already told you that several times. It is not me who controls either the tariffs or the way in which trade is carried out. The daimyo controls it. If you want to see how to change that, you'll have to seek advice from him. Noki reiterated once more, feeling the need to squeeze the bridge of her nose. The only thing I do in matters like this is to send men and women to protect and kill. The young man turned a little pale, but did not flinch. If I were a ninja, I would have a lot more respect for him. That said, I still felt the need to be kind to him. Although Taki was an extremely small nation, it had many quite skilled shinobi. Skilled enough to sit small groups of ninjas a stone's throw from the walls of Konohagakure. And although Iwa had better counterspeeds than its counterparts, it was unwilling to risk angering the smaller nation. Not with his Nagakure making strange movements to the south. Asunagakure had never liked them very much. If there was something to be gained, the current Keisuke would surely lead his men into the conflict, even for a 5-kilometer advantage. The dog of war, as the Noki preferred to call him. I have already requested advice with your daimyo, Mugen informed the Tsuchikage. He ignored me and opted to spend 3 months on vacation in the north with his family. To himself, Noki wanted to squint. No one, apart from his son, his granddaughter and himself, knew that the daimyo and his family were out of the country. And much less on vacation in the north. I'm sorry. I didn't know he had gone on vacation. We're not really friends, he lied. He and the current daimyo were quite close. They were not best friends, but they were good enough to be invited to his palace for a nice party, and to drink several pitchers. Keeping his face would be while confronting Mugen. Noki absent-mindedly wondered how that man knew about the daimyo's vacation. He hadn't even told his family that he was taking them on vacation until after he informed them himself. To hire a couple of guards. Her son and granddaughter. Mentally remembering that he would be followed after being dismissed, Noki opened his mouth to end the meeting. When his office door was abruptly opened inward. Turning his head towards the intruder, Mugen turned around, and his right hand extended towards his hip for some strange reason. The Sandai Matsuchikai noticed out of the corner of his eye before refocusing all his attention on the intruder. The man, sweaty, tired, scratched and torn, almost collapsed on the floor of his office, while panting with difficulty. 2 guards came in line behind him, both with guns drawn, about to stop him. "Taitsuchikama." The man shouted in a harsh, gravelly voice, as if a cooling liquid had not touched his lips or throat in centuries. "I have urgent news." With slightly arched eyebrows, Noki looked first at the man, then at Taki's representative, and then at the intruder. Even if he was meddling, it was certainly a way to escape from the representative as soon as possible. "News?" he asked, intrigued by the man's words. "Tell me, what is so important that you felt the need to interrupt a meeting between my guest and me?" He nodded to Mugen, who had finally withdrawn his hand from his hip and had begun to feel at his words. Her lips were pressed together in a thin, tight line. The intruder did not speak. He narrowed his haggard gaze at the man and, except for gasping, remained silent. Instantly, he perceived the action as a silent code between Iwagakure shinobi. He put even more pressure on the man. And the man quickly knelt down and sank his gaze into on the floor or carpeted. "Sorry for the intrusion, Tsuchikaja-sama." Still panting, he remained motionless. "And guards, take him to a detention room." Noki spoke to the 2 men. "Give him water and stay at the door until he arrives." The 2 men nodded and approached. To the kneeling man. Grabbing him by the armpits, they stood him up and escorted him out of the office down the hallway, leaving the Noki alone with Mugen. Turning to the Taki native, he smiled a forced smile. "Sorry for the intrusion, Mugen-sana, but as you may not know, these things happen." It's understandable, Mujana felt, with a slight blush on her cheeks, as she outlined a slight embarrassed smile. "Now, where were we?" "I think Noki didn't have time to finish the sentence when the doors of her office slammed open, attracting the attention of both men. One of the guards was standing at the door, holding his left side in pain as he prepared to head to his cage. And the suspect, Noki-sama. He broke free and is heading towards the village. Frowning, Noki got up from the chair and stretched his back, creaking in several spots, which caused a dull pain in his lower back. Ignoring him, he turned to his guest. "I'm sorry to interrupt this meeting, Mugen-san, but it seems they need me somewhere else." Without waiting for the young man's answer, he turned to the window behind his desk. He opened it, made a silent gesture with his hand to his wounded guard before jumping from the towering building. "Peparo?" stuttered Mugen, jumping up and running around the desk of the Tsuchikage, looking out the window. Instinctively, looking for the bird, he was surprised to see the little old man crossing the sky. His lower jaw separated from the upper one, and he tried to form a wordless sentence. He didn't make it. Reckless plans were not his forte, but if he had to guess, Noki could only assume that the man who had entered his office had really meant what he had told her earlier. "Although I intended to interrupt Mugen's hesitant negotiations to excuse myself and deal with this man, I intended to do it a little later." Mugen, if that was the man's real name, had acted strangely like a sea shinobi. Well trained when the anonymous man broke into his office, and for a man who claimed to have had no formal shinobi training. Prior to acting like a seasoned veteran, in any case, he would let his guards. "They'll take care of Mugen while I'm looking for the fugitive." A girl's scream down there caught his attention. Looking back at the ground, Noki easily identified an individual running through the village, heading towards the eastern part. "I see, you're on your way, smart man." Ignoring the screams of several women as the fleeing man jumped the fences separating the hot springs from the rest of the village. Without stopping for a second to observe the women and their features, Noki headed towards the eastern mountain and accelerated, hoping to intercept the man. With him, a familiar voice echoed throughout the class as Umino Iruka informed the new team members. 7 about his friends. The whole class turned their heads and eyes to observe a familiar pink-haired girl, who had stood up and loudly protested against one of her new classmates, the first to do so to date. Sasuke-kun, I see, Iruka-sensei. But Naruto did not fail the graduation exam. Mistakes happen, Aruno-sen. Iruka grunted sharply, visibly disgusted by the girl's reaction. Naruto, oddly enough, hadn't had a fit of rage upon learning that he was on the same team as Sasuke, his rival. Clearly. The girl whispered softly, provoking quiet giggles from her classmates who were sitting next to her. Ignoring the girl's outburst, Iruka continued. Team 8 will be composed of panting heavily when opening the door of an old hideout of war, embedded in the eastern mountainside that framed the eastern boundary of the village. Jin crawled to the hideout, turned around, and slammed the door shut. Falling to his knees, with his legs finally about to give way, the man began coughing violently. Do you know? You should have stayed at least long enough to drink and rest before doing this mischief, Chunin. The sound of the Tsuchikage made the Chunin jump in fear. He threw himself to the ground and bowed to the hidden figure of the Iowa leader. You are very lucky that I have these old stashes full of fresh water and edibles. The sound of a wooden barrel filling with liquid flooded the tired Chunin's ears. As the sound of the liquid faded away, the sound of a match being lit in the darkness filled his ears. A sudden spark, and then the pungent smell of burning sulfur filled the suddenly lit hiding place. Taking his gaze away from the small but bright flame, the Chunin waited for the light to intensify slightly, which meant that the flame that the match had created had touched the wick of a candle. Turning his eyes to the light, the Chunin found the Noki sitting up, behind a small wooden table, with two small wooden barrels filled with water. Still on the ground, chest heaving, the Chunin gave himself a few more seconds for his heart to recover before trying to stand up. It took him almost 2 minutes to be able to stand up. He sat down slowly, with his chest still heaving and sweat running down his face. His eyes stung. The Chunin dried it with dirty sleeves. Tsuchikage-sama, he began, bending his head over his water barrel. Sorry for the intrusion. Don't worry, Chunin. The old man grunted. You may have discovered a mole in my office with your trick. The Chunin looked up with bleary eyes and a shocked expression on his face. Now, began the Noki, taking up his keg. Quench your thirst, boy. He took a sip and, with his left hand, urged the Chunin to do the same with your barrel. Grasping the wooden cup hesitantly, the Chunin stared at it for a few seconds before putting the fresh liquid to his lips. Noki watched as the Chunin emptied the barrel in a matter of seconds, without stopping to breathe. He grabbed the faucet protruding from a large barrel to his left. Silently, he asked the Chunin if he wished for more. The young man nodded greedily and handed the barrel back to the bauble. After filling it and returning it to the Chunin, Noki leaned back in his chair and took another sip from his own water barrel. So, tell me, Chunin, who are you and what is so important that you felt the need to break into my office without warning? The Chunin blushed deeply as he felt the embarrassment. He set his keg down on the little wooden table and stared at it in silence. For almost a minute, they both remained silent, with the flame of a small candle dancing between them, while the young man put his thoughts in order. And my name, Ingenie, and until almost 2 weeks ago, I was on a B-rank mission with my partner Tai. He started, and Nokia slowly felt as he remembered the young man's name. We were hired through the mission office by means of a courier bird. A mission was needed. To competent and experienced Chunin to help an individual who not only wanted to flee from their home village, but also steal something of value from them. Who was the contractor? A shinobi of rank. Chunin of Kanawagakure, Tsuchikage-sama, Jin replied, his voice slightly muffled, as the old man sighed irritably. The Chunin we found, a 2-day trip from the village, was named Toyimizuki, and he was looking to flee Kanawagakure, with what turned out to be his frightened sealing scroll. The Noki's eyes widened. That's it, quite a feat for a Chunin to try. The Sandai Metsuchikai mused dryly. I had heard about the scroll. There was not a fuck in the world who had not done it. It contained dozens of jutsus and highly sealing techniques. lethal, that the great one of the villages had received thanks to her allies, now long since destroyed, the Uzumaki clan. A clan of sealing masters from the now destroyed village of Uzusio Gakure. What would a chunin do with such an object? Sell it? He wondered. He nodded for the young man to continue. I guess everything went well at first, although Mizuki never told us exactly what she needed, unless we provided support. Jim started again. In fact, it wasn't until a blonde, blue-eyed boy, about 10 years old, maybe a little older, came out, running out of the surrounding forest with Oya, who told us to do something. What did this Mizuki tell you to do? Please tell me. He told us to stay back to help him when he needed it, and then he went to confront the boy. Why did she confront a boy? He told you why? Apparently, the boy was the one who stole the scroll for Mizuki. Not Kisama. The Tsuchikage narrowed his eyes. He used it to steal the scroll and then planned to kill the boy and run away with him. Unfortunately for everyone, another Konoha ninja appeared. Iruka said. Rummaging through his robe, Noki pulled out a small black book. He opened it and, looking through a specific section, found the name of the man in question. Omino Iruka, instructor at Chunin Academy. High rank C and with a reward of 9,000 rivers. Obviously, he is not one of the most well-known ninja in Konoha. Still, a ninja could turn the tide of any battle. He put the book down on the table and motioned for Jin to continue. Mizuki waited on Iruka. He cut off the back of the man's leg and let him bleed to death. Noki blinked in confusion. It seems to me that he had a bit of a superiority complex, the old man growled. Nodding, Jin continued. He did, and the boy seemed to annoy him more than the Chunin. He asked us to hold him. Although he didn't look very well at first, almost like he was sick or something, Tai and I. We ran outside, picked him up and waited to see what Mizuki wanted us to do with him. Or we used it as a shield, in case more Konoha ninjas appeared or not. What did he do? He gloated, Jin stated bluntly. He approached the boy, with the other Chunin bleeding out behind him. Completely ignoring him, just to gloat. Jin frowned. Although it was extremely childish and stupid, I'm glad he did it, because, if he hadn't, we wouldn't have found out that the boy he was planning to kill apparently, part of his original target was a Hinshiriki. Noki felt her eyes widen as she understood the information. And with only one Bijulu that has attacked the village in the last decade or so being the Kyubi. Noki squinted her eyes until they were mere slits. Kyubi, not Kitsune. Yes. The two men lapsed into silence. Again, with only the flickering flame dancing on the candle between them, the silence they were in widened. For more than 10 minutes, the two ninjas remained seated by the light of the candle, in complete silence. What's his name? The Noki finally asked, breaking the long silence. Who? The child? Jin asked. The Tsuchikage nodded. I didn't hear the boy's clan name, but his first name is Naruto. Naruto, huh? The old man hummed. Jin nodded. Are you going to kill him? We can't let Kono Agakure have that advantage, the old man mused quietly. However, with our two Hinshiriki missing, it would be wise to try to bring the boy here, voluntarily or not. Kidnapping. Maybe and maybe point to point. What's wrong with this guy? Naruto wondered as he finally sat down to Sakura's right. The red-haired girl had chosen to sit to Sasuke's right, and, since she didn't want to sit next to the black-haired boy, she opted to sit next to Sakura, even though she had commented that he was on the same team as her. In front of the trio, there was Sujounen sensei. A man named, well, come to think of it, they only knew that his first name was Kakashi. Iruka sensei had not told them the name of his clan. I wish I could tell her that. Of course, that was not the cause of his frustration. No, the cause of their frustration was that the man had arrived 4 hours late to pick them up. 4. No one had done that to them before. No one. So far, it was safe to say that he didn't like his new sensei. Taking a quick look at the line, I was almost sure. I'm sure Sasuke felt the same way about him. Okay, the man began, catching the attention of the three preteens. Since it's a little late, I think we should get this over with already. Leaning on the railing that bordered the academy building, the man pointed at Sasuke. "So, why don't you introduce yourself?" "Sensei," Sakura interrupted. The silver-haired man looked at her with his one eye and cocked his head slightly, like a dog trying to figure out where a noise was coming from. "Why don't you go first? To teach us how to do it." The man put a hand to his chin and looked up for a moment before dedicating a strange and chilling smile to them. "No," he said cheerfully. "It's not that difficult," he added. "I just want to know what your name is, what are your dreams? If you have more than one, what do you like and what not? Other than that, you can add anything you want." "Are you going to introduce yourself?" Sasuke asked, speaking for the first time since before lunch. The man shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe and maybe," he didn't say calmly. "It will depend on how I feel. I'll give you something to feel." Naruto felt a slight twitch in his left ear as he heard Sakura's whisper seeping into his ear. Looking at her out of the corner of his eye, he thought for a moment that the girl's pupils had shone slightly. Shaking her head slightly, attributing it to the time of day and lack of sleep, she turned her attention to the man with the hair. Silver in front of him. "Fine," Sasuke growled. Clasping his hands in front of him, the jet-haired preteen opened his mouth. "My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I like to train, and I like cats." Both Sakura and Naruto found themselves looking strangely at the only Uchiha member. "I don't like annoying people." The boy looked at Naruto and Sakura, who blushed slightly. "And I don't like people who are late for no reason." At that moment, the jet-haired boy looked at his newly appointed sensei, who simply smiled at him and waved at him. Sasuke let out a slight sigh of disappointment before continuing. "My dream, to restore my clan, my wish, to kill a certain man." Sasuke's tone of voice dropped several octaves, causing Sakura and Naruto to shiver. Oddly enough, his new sense already felt. He moved away from him and pointed at Sakura. "Now you, Miss Pinky." The girl turned her head to look at the man and looked at him with irritation. "My name is Aruno Sakura, not Miss Rosa," he emphasized, earning a smile from the man in front of the group. "I like flowers and pressing them, I like it too." She looked to her left, and a barely scream, audible, reached the ears of the three men. "I don't like Nobuta or Naruto." Frowning, Naruto lowered his head slightly. "My dream is to one day be the wife of a great man and start a family." His gaze drifted back to Sasuke, and another, louder scream filled the air. Naruto barely contained a snort of amusement when he saw the jet-haired boy walking away from the red-haired girl to his left, who immediately moved closer to him. The little show ended when his new sensei cleared his throat. Both preteens stopped and looked at the silver-haired man. "Funny, I suppose," he said dryly. He diverted his attention from Sakura to Naruto. "And now you, Whiskers." "Whiskers, what am I, a cat?" Naruto muttered to himself, earning a snort from Sasuke. Naruto stared at him with a gloomy gaze for several seconds before looking back at the Hounen in front of him. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen and working out. I don't like the 3 minutes it takes for instant ramen to cook, and I don't like treacherous ones." Kakashi nodded slightly. "My dream is to become an Hokage, but my short-term goal is to become someone who deserves the rank of genius." "Naruto Baka," Sakura said with a sigh, shaking her head. Sasuke, at his side, snorted softly. "Short-term goals are good for a shinobi, actually," the Jounin paused. "They are good for everyone. They keep you focused and give you a goal." She turned to look at the blonde, and dedicated her creepy smile to him. "If Naruto-kun wants to aspire to be someone worthy of being called Genin, good for him." He looked at the other two Genin squad members before continuing. "Actually, being a Genin is a lot harder than you think, Pink." "My name is not Pink." Sakura growled at the man, surprising her two companions, who turned their heads in her direction, their eyes wide and traces of fear inside. "And besides, I'm 3 times more Genin than he is. I didn't fail my Genin exams 3 times. Kakashi watched the blonde man's head tilt instinctively and shook his head to himself. "Really? Can you prove it to me?" he asked the girl, who nodded. His smile changed and a great weight fell on the 3 recent graduates, while the man was laughing covertly behind his mask. Well, then they will have the opportunity to prove that they are 3 times better than their quiet blonde partner, tomorrow at 5 a.m. At training camp number 7. We will have a review exam. He raised a hand before anyone could interrupt. You can pass or fail, but I warn you. He leaned towards the 3 of them, closely watching Sakura, which forced the girl to lean back slightly. I've been assigned to 7 indifferent gen squads to be their sense. And I've suspended them all. He was hurt when he realized the gravity of the situation, with expressions of amazement on their faces. If you can prove to me that you really deserve your new position, I will recognize you. If not, go back to the academy and attend reinforcement classes for the next 6 months, where you will have one more chance. If you fail at that second chance, it's over. He spun on his heels and jumped onto the metal railing, separating the edge of the building from nothing. And, to fulfill my end of the bargain above, pink. My name is Kakashi Attack. I like several things and dislike others. And the dreams. Well, let's just say that, because of what you said, I don't feel like telling you anything. He pretended to sob. You could make fun of me too, and he turned and smiled at the 3 scared genin. All of them were still looking at him with an expression of amazement and horror. Remember, he began waving to you at 5 o'clock tomorrow. Boot camp 7th, and if I were you, I would skip breakfast and you may regret it. The training camp 7 the next morning 10:14 a.m. Ah, well, I see you're all here, Kakashi started as he headed to the training ground. His simple and relaxed attitude further angered the tired, hungry, and extremely furious genin, who had been minding their own business, so they had been waiting for him for the last 5 hours before his arrival. Sasuke, who was going through his hand seals at a rather impressive speed for a genin, as Kakashi observed, stopped at the Tora seal. Sakura, who was leaning on the trunk of one of the surrounding trees, fell asleep and woke up when Naruto, who had been doing squats, push-ups and sit-ups for who knows how long, stopped and gave her a fuck in the side to wake her up from her nap. Her efforts landed her a quick and painful punch in the face, courtesy of the redhead. She had also been the only one who opened her mouth to greet him. What the hell? She snapped, pointing at him angrily. You said 5, not 10. To his left and to his right, both boys nodded. Yeah, I could have gotten a couple more hours of sleep, Naruto clung on, absently rubbing his left wrist, as he straightened up from Sakura's punch. To himself, the Jounin wondered why the boy was rubbing his wrist and not his face. Trying to save face. He wondered. He shrugged his shoulders. Well, my alarm clock went off in the middle of the night. So I slept until after 5, my fault, he said with a smile. It smells like a lie to me, Naruto whispered to his 2 companions, who nodded. Kakashi, who had heard the whisper, closed his eye, sighed and shook his head. In any case, he insisted, ignoring Naruto's comment. We're running out of time, so he took out a stopwatch and placed it on top of one of the 3 training poles in the clearing, and smiled back at them. His test is to try to catch one of these. He held 2 brass bells with 2 thin strands of yarn that he had taken from his left trouser pocket, and swung them in front of the 3 preteens. By noon. Is that all? Naruto asked. The man nodded. Wait a minute, there's only 2 of them and 3 of us. Did you solve it? The man asked, hoping that the blonde had understood a small part of the exam. When the blonde slowly shook his head, the Jounin sighed. There are 3 of you, but there are only 2 bells. You must get one to try. But you can't share it with anyone else. If you don't get one, go back to the academy, while I train whoever gets one, got it? But that means that one of us will return to the academy, no matter what, Sakura commented. Kakashi smiled at him and nodded. Exactly. He grunted. Only the best of the best are allowed to remain Kono Agakure's shinobi. She tied her bells around her waist as she spoke. Are you the best of the best? Sasuke, who had tensed up a while earlier, pounced on the Jounin. With his right hand outstretched, he was looking for a bell. The man dodged him and let the genin fly by. The black-haired preteen fell face-first to the ground. Almost, but not enough, Kakashi joked. Try attacking me with the intention of killing next time, that might work. So saying, the man pressed a button on the watch, and, with a short but sharp beep, disappeared into the surrounding forest. Sorry for the wait, Mugen apologized the Noki, as he walked through the door of the room where Mugen was waiting for him. I hope you were treated well during my absence. Murm. The man groaned as he struggled against the stone chair to which he had been tied before the Tsuchikaige's return. I'm sorry, the old man said as he turned to face him, a grim smile forming on his face as he surveyed the man in front of him. But I don't understand what dialect you speak. What is that? Sock language. The guard on his left, hidden in the dim light of the room, chuckled covertly as the old man made fun of the infiltrator's impromptu joke. Fun aside, Mugen. I think it's time for you and me to have an honest talk, what do you say? The man roared through the sock. Oh my god, isn't your name Mugen? Oh my god. Noki shook her head, clicking her tongue slightly. You know, it's lucky my granddaughter's not here, Mugen, said the Tsuchikaige as he took a small block of wood and a metal prod. The bound man's eyes widened at the sight of the instruments in his hands. She's not the kind to torture. At least not yet. I'd rather stick this wand in your guts and beat you with this block of wood until you reveal all the information you can imagine. I, on the other hand, have the time and patience to play with you. The bound man looked at the little man's hands and found the metal rod separating from the wooden block. I hope you like the music, Mugen. Talk. I do like it. Depressed, disheveled, bruised, the three aspiring genin were slumping on the field lawn. Of training, he semi-cleaned, while his sensei Jounin, sitting on a wooden pole, devoured the second and last lunchbox, with which he had surprised them halfway through the exam. Any questions? He asked between taking a pinch of rice and swallowing the previous one. And the three genin looked away. Sasuke looked down at the ground, at his fists to be more precise, and frowned silently. Sakura stared at the inside of her eyelids, trying unsuccessfully to hold back the tears. Naruto was sitting behind them, his wrists writhing as he stared straight ahead, shattered and dazed. Right? Kakashi asked before putting another spoonful in his mouth. Silence reigned as he chewed. Well, if you ask me, she began as she set the lunchbox down on her lap and readjusted her face mask. They should go back to the academy. It is painfully obvious that this year's generation has a lot of problems. None of you collaborated, even though it had been offered to you at least twice. And even more, one of you was more than willing to use lethal force to kill me. Not caring if he killed his own comrades who were in the line of fire, and without warning them in any way. Uchiha, you're a loner. But as a team, you can't be. You have to trust your teammates, just as they need to trust you. The boy's gaze shifted from his fists to the man for a split second, before taking a deep breath, and looking at his hands again. Pink, you have to realize that Sasuke won't always be there to rescue you, although I feel like he made it very clear today. That he doesn't give a damn if you're in danger or not, and to be stronger. You also have to be willing to work with Naruto. Believe me when I tell you that there are worse people to team up with, and you will have to work with one of them sooner or later. The girl's shoulders sank even deeper, and her sobs became louder for a split second. Also, you need to take at least half of what you learned in the books and throw it at the wall. Enemies are not going to wait for you to mentally repeat a list of what you can do, what they can do, and what they should or shouldn't be able to do. Think fast, Pink. Think fast. Addressing the last member of the failed team, Kakashi shook his head. And you, Whiskers, have a lot of determination, that's for sure. Feeling determined is fine, but you have to realize that despite feeling motivated, whether it's a goal or the objective of a mission, sometimes you need to assess the danger. You should be able to determine if something is too dangerous to complete alone, or even too dangerous for your team to control. There is nothing wrong with running away from combat, especially if it saves the lives of your allies, or provides them with information about an enemy. As things stand right now, I wouldn't feel comfortable sending you back to the academy. Sure, you might learn something in the next 6 months, but I doubt it." He made a sign, and 3 different copies of himself appeared behind him. "And since I am your Junin-sensei, until the end of the day, or until I return to the office of the Okage and inform him of my decision. From now on I revoke your rights as a genin and expel you from the body." The 3 heads suddenly stood up to look at him, too stunned by the man's words. To do anything to prevent the clones from shortening the distance between them and removing the ribbons from them before returning with the silver-haired man at the training post. "I'm saying goodbye to you as you try to find something else to focus your lives on." With that said, the man and his clones disappeared, leaving 3 civilian preteens alone, stunned, humiliated, and now normal.